Okay, cool. Hi everybody, welcome to the Nature Center. For those of you who haven't met me, my name's Lily. I'm the history intern this summer at Chik-Wauk, and I'm very excited to be introducing our speaker today. Before I totally jump into things, I want to say thank you to Visit Cook County and to the Gunflint Trail Historical Society Gift Club for making this possible. We really appreciate it. So, today we are very lucky to have Sue Kerfoot speaking. Many of you probably know the Kerfoot family or know the name of the Kerfoot family. They are Gunflint Trail legends. Sue Kerfoot has been a member of the Gunflint Trail Historical Society since its founding. She was also president from 2008 to 2010 and is one of the board of trustees as well. Sue is also all throughout our archives. She's a fantastic historian. I've had the pleasure of doing a lot of digging and her name pops up all the time. So yeah, for those of you who don't know, Sue Kerfoot has lived on the trail since I have the mid-60s, but you might have to correct me.
First summer was 64.
64, okay. So for many a year, and has operated, or did operate, Gunflint Lodge with Bruce, her husband, for over 50 years. So, without further ado, Sue Kerfoot.
I'll wait while she adjusts. No pictures, you can see behind me, there's no screen, because I was the owner. I took the pictures, so there's nothing of me in there. But I do have a long story to tell you. I have to say I loved running the resort, the outfitters, any part of it. It was just good for me to see people, talk with people, and explain this country to them. But I didn't come knowing anything. I was raised in the Chicago suburbs, born in 1945, and was raised in the Lutheran church. And it so happened that our minister had a sister who was married, it's always convoluted, married to a professor at St. Olaf. So he thought St. Olaf was a good place to go, and that's where I ended up going. And my folks drove me up, brought me in, packed everything into the room, and left. About 15 minutes later, a woman by the name of Bev Olson came in. She was also a freshman, going to live just down the hall from me. And we became friends then. Bev was from Grand Marais. She was also a good friend of a girl a year ahead of us, and that was Sharon Kerfoot. And later on, when it came time to start looking for summer jobs, I was looking, I wanted to go somewhere other than Chicago. And Bev said, well, why don't you talk with Sharon? Her mother owns a resort up the Gunflint Trail. And then later, Bruce and his wife at that time, Sue, came in, and I got a job working in the gift shop. And the result of knowing Bev means that I blame her for everything that happened for the rest of my life. She got me started in this. So that was good. And the summer that I worked here, and I worked in the gift shop for 2 summers, were just eye-openers. I was a city girl. My family was from the city. I knew nothing about anything up here. I had fished with a bamboo pole in the forest preserves near where I grew up. I had never canoed. I had never camped out. I had never done anything that we consider to be normal up here. So the first summer, I learned a lot, and I enjoyed it, and I liked it, but you know, there was really no place for me here. And so I went back. After my junior year in college, I worked in a paint factory in Chicago. I totaled orders and sent bills out. I zip-coded their mailing list at that time. And that worked out well. I earned more money than I earned at Gunflint, and it was a good thing because I spent the first semester of my senior year in the Middle East. Took a little money, but it was well worth it. While I was doing that, Bruce's marriage got into trouble and dissolved and got a divorce. Fine and dandy. I came out of college. I got a job in a bank in downtown Chicago, and I worked in the department that paid off trusts. and we handled a fair amount of money. Bruce, meanwhile, was coming to Chicago to go to a sports show. And his sister Sharon suggested, why didn't he get together with me one night and take me out to dinner? Which he did. And in October, we were married. Now, if Bruce was here, he would have an entirely different story to tell. He would say, the general plot line is that two scheming women trapped a naive Northwoods boy. But he's not here, so you have to go with me. And my first year at the lodge was the beginning of learning again. I learned more that year than I probably have ever learned any other year in my life, because the whole livelihood was so different. It was nothing I had ever experienced before, but I did. So we got married in early October, late October, and we took a little honeymoon around. We drove around Lake Superior. We didn't have any money. We just did it, and it was called a honeymoon, and that was fine. And when we got back here, we lived in an old trailer that Bruce had when he lived in the Army. And the Army delivered it back to where he lived on Gunflint Lake, his address. And our house was there. It was enclosed, but it was not finished. And for about a week, he worked on finishing it so that we could live in it. And so the kitchen had a sink. It was set on a frame of 2x4s. We had a $5 used stove and 2 banquet tables from the lodge that were our countertops. And that was it. And we had off our bedroom a toilet, a sink set on 2x4s again, a tub shower, and the walls of the tub shower were unfinished plywood. In other words, no shower. And so that got us started. I mean, this was the beginning. We lived there for 45 years. But that, when we first moved in, it wasn't finished by any stretch of the imaginations. And Bruce and his brother-in-law, Jim Schaffner, and a man named Jack Underwood from Golden Eagle Lodge were building 3 A-frames on the land east of the lodge. And those A-frames and the campground that went with it are now Gunflint Pines. But at that time, it was all ours, and it was a real interesting thing. I remember when they were taking and shingling it, I was enlisted to come down to help carry shingles up. And I didn't have to carry them in a full bundle, which was a good thing because I couldn't carry it. But the hardest thing was that the scaffolding they built was for men, not me. And so I'd be pulling myself up and around, but we got it done, and that worked. And then about a week or so after we got finished, or got home, deer season started. Again, another big thing in Minnesota that I had never experienced. And so on Saturday, no work day, Bruce and I, along with Jim Schaffner, took a boat across the lake to Warren's Point. And at that time, there weren't anywhere near the number of houses there were there now. There weren't any houses, period. And Bruce and I were set up on a stand, and Jim was going to drive the deer past. And Bruce quickly was able to take and kill a deer. And so the neighbors, Jim and he, hauled the deer down back to the lake to get it in the boat. And my responsibility was to put in one hand the warm heart and in the other hand the warm liver. That was my first and last deer hunt. But I also found out that shooting the deer is only the beginning of the deer process. And it has to be butchered. And then Karen Chilson and I took and packaged it in packages for 2 people. Again, that's fine and dandy. But then somebody has to cook the meal with the deer. And that was a problem. I was a cook in name only. My mother had been a really good cook. She cooked all the years I was at home. When I was in college, I went to a cafeteria to eat. And so I had to learn to cook, and cook something I had never eaten myself. So it was very much a learning experience. Bruce was very patient. His only reaction would be if I cooked a meal and it was no good, he ate it, that was fine. If I cooked the same meal with the same result a second time, Bruce would not say grace that night. It all worked. And slowly my cooking skills improved. I'd try different recipes, I'd learn to do it, and so we'd have a greater span of recipes that I could put on the table, and it worked pretty easily. I only had one very small kitchen fire. I did learn to cook better than my mother-in-law, which is not a great problem. Mother was never known for her cooking. So we got there. And then another problem that I encountered that first year was dressing when you're outside in the woods. Bruce did not want me to buy any winter clothing in Chicago. In the first place, I wouldn't know what to get, and in the second place, I couldn't find it in Chicago. So for my birthday, Bruce gave me my first pair of bean boots, which I have never been out. I have always had since then. I think I must be on the 5th or 6th or whatever pair of them, but they are a godsend up here. And then other things were long underwear, sorrel boots, a heavy winter jacket, a stocking cap, choppers. It was practical, it wasn't stylish, and on cold days it was wonderful. One day in November, Justine asked me if I wanted to go with her. She was going across the lake the next day, and she was going to work with Charlie Cook and Lillian Plummer to clear the trail up to Charlie's Cook's trapping shack on Cook Lake, which is not Cook Lake now, but it is then. And so the next morning, she and I took out across the lake to meet the two of them, probably halfway down the lake, where we picked up Charlie's trail. Mother had a chainsaw, Charlie came with an axe, and Butchie and I were there to haul everything off the trail to make it clean. So Mom would go first, she'd cut the big trees, Charlie would take the axe to brush on either side, and then Butchie and I came to take and clear up the mess. And it was interesting, we came to a small pond and we stopped, and Charlie started a fire. I thought, oh, this is interesting, why are we starting a fire? Well, he just reached behind a tree and off came a small little pot. He filled it with water from the pond, and it was tea time. And so that's what we did, and tea was easier to haul than coffee. It's a good thing nobody drank coffee up here then. You know, tea was the big deal. The Canadians had infiltrated us to that far along. And everything kind of traveled along the same way. They all worked at a steady pace, they never stopped, and we just moved along the trail. At one point, Butchie gave me a lesson in the names of the trees. And we stood, and she said, this is a poplar. This is a birch. And she went all the way around the circle and pointed out all these trees. Well, I could hardly identify exactly which tree she was pointing to. And by the time she was done, I was thoroughly confused. Eventually, I did learn the names, but it took a while. And for lunch, we stopped at another pond. We had each bought a sandwich and a couple cookies, and we got water out of the pond, and that was it. After the day was over, Justine and I took and came back across the lake. I was exhausted. Now, Justine, Charlie, and Lily were all in their 60s. I was 21, and I felt like 71. But it was a learning experience, and it's kind of took and put a little humility in the way you looked at things. Back at the lodge, I had lots of learning experiences too. In fact, the whole summer was kind of that way. We took, and one of the jobs was helping with the lodge office work, which is not really that hard. I mean, you get, especially at that time, inquiries came in the mail. people wanted to make reservations. You had to answer the inquiries, and at that time we used what was called a robotypist, which is run by air, and it types a set message or a set letter. It's kind of like a player piano. It's always the same thing. And so that was easy. I could figure that out. But reservations were a whole different story. Reservations were entered into a chart. The cabins were on this side, and each one had a line. And each line was divided up into a day. And it was done in pencil because you had to change it and erase it all the time. And it wasn't hard until things happened. I got a letter from somebody and they said they wanted to come up this year from the July 10th to the 16th. Well, that's all they said. They wanted their same cabin from last year, and they wanted their same guide on such and such a days. So the question arises, is the 16th the day they are leaving or the last day of their stay? What was the cabin that they stayed in last year? Who was their guide? Well, luckily at that time of year, in those years, we got mail, let's see, Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday, I believe it was. So there was time to ask Bruce. In fact, there was time to ask Bruce lots of questions about this reservation. But I figured it out, and we got there. And you had to take and be very careful the way you printed in the reservation on the page. There was nothing else except Smith printed across 9 days. That was it. And there was no place to put in special requests. You had to know who Smith was to get at least the name and address, and that's all you could get. So it was kind of interesting to figure it all out. Then another thing that we had, another area of adjustment, was social. I've never been a big social person, but by almost any standard, we lived a remote life. Justine lived just across the driveway. Down at the end of the road, Peggy and Merle Heston lived. Al Bukowski was right near there, although we didn't socialize with him because if he came for dinner, you had to feed him every dinner from now till eternity. So we didn't do that. Then across the lake for part of the winter, we had the Besmans who ran Borderland Lodge. Charlie Cook and Lillian Plummer lived on the Canadian side of the lake. And that was it on Gunflint Lake. A lot different population than we have now during the winter. On Round Lake, we had the Mark family, Marie, Jerry, and then their 3 daughters, Debbie, who's sitting over there, Lindy, and Pip. Down at Loon Lake, we had the Willard and Kermit Johnson. They ran Loon Lake Lodge at that time. But that's the whole number of people we had. So it was quiet, to put it mildly. We also had limited contact with the outside world. Telephones were party lines. Long distance was expensive. Anything you said over a party line could be repeated and changed. We had a TV with 2 channels from Thunder Bay, but it didn't work if there were leaves on the trees because they couldn't go through it. We had no local radio stations. At night we received stations from all over, depending on what the weather was, but it always changed, so you never knew what you were going to get. And the mail, like I said, came only 3 days a week during the winter. So it was rather remote. Our winter break was the Chicago Sports Show. We had a man named Dale Chilson who was here at that time running Gunflint Canada Airways, and he would fly people up north into Canada for fishing trips. And he came with us, and we would put the 3 of us in the front seat of a station wagon and then cram in the back every bit that was required for our exhibit at the sports show, which was always interesting. And we'd drive down to Chicago. We'd stay at my folks. They were an hour away from where the sports show was, but they were free. And so that was always good. And then we would take and we'd go down. Usually we went down on the day the sports show opened and set up our booth, and the men would set the booth up. My responsibility was to go to catering and find someone who was going to give us free ice for our coolers for the week. And then when the show opened, we pasted smiles on our faces. We said the same thing over and over and over again. We hoped that people would make a few reservations, and they did make a surprising number of reservations at that time. Or they called later to make reservations. But it was busy. We were there at 10 in the morning till 10 at night. We did absolutely no sightseeing. We didn't do shopping. We didn't do anything like that. We were there to get reservations. It was the familiar results of a business trip, which many of you in this room I know have made. You do your business, you're not there to sightsee. And that's what we did. So the last day of the show, we packed up our stuff, we went back to my folks' house, and then the next day we drove up here, and we were glad to be up here. It didn't seem quite so remote, but it was very interesting. And so it was a good, during its time, a good marketing area. You actually got reservations. It's kind of a little different nowadays. I would think that it's more of a day's event to go to the sports show. But we enjoyed it at that time. Then we got to spring coming along, and that's when the pace started to pick up. Winter had always been kind of quiet. Shortly after, a couple years we had winter business, but it wasn't much to begin with. We had to follow our friend Dave and Bart Tuttle and get into cross-country skiing. And that worked out well, but it took a while to develop it. And when summer started to arrive, things picked up because we had that deadline, the opening of the walleye season, and everything had to be open and ready at that date. We had staff coming in, we had cabins to clean. Bruce usually hadn't put the water in the cabins before we cleaned them, so they had to haul water from my house down to the cabins to clean them. The whole lodge had to be re-cleaned. I discovered later, I didn't realize it then, we had cleaned the lodge, or Bruce and his crew had cleaned the lodge really well when they closed it. But by the time we got back to looking at it after a whole winter, it looked like a mess. Because we'd been in and out, gotten this, gotten that, put it back, done whatever. So that was an experience cleaning a supposed clean lodge. About a week before we decided to open up, a representative, our salesman, whose name I can't remember, from Gamble Robinson, the food company, called to get our spring order, because naturally we had as little food as possible in the lodge. And so we took, and Bruce and I had worked ahead of time, and we had an order, and we gave it to him, and that was fine. It all came, we put it away. And a week later, Bruce said, "Have you got your food order done?" And I said, "What do you mean? I don't know anything about it." There were no order sheets, there were no quantities. There was nothing. But we had one ace in the hole, and that was a woman named Aggie Jackson. And Aggie Jackson's father had run logging operations on the Gunflint Trail, and she had been a cook in them. And then she had cooked for several summers, and I'm not sure exactly how many, with Gunflint Lodge for the whole summer. She was retired now, but she came in the spring and in the fall before our regular summer cook came. And so that was my ace in the hole. Aggie knew more than I knew. There was no question about it. She helped me with the orders until I kind of figured it out. I mean, if in the beginning, if I had walked through the storeroom where all the food was stored and we were out of something, I wouldn't have known it because there was nothing there to remind me. And even if I did notice it, I would wonder, how much do I order? So she helped me with all that stuff, but she also helped me learning to judge, did the guests really like the food? she liked to go over to the dishwasher and see what was coming in on the plates. And if there were plates with Swiss steak on them, like lots of them, she altered the recipe because obviously people didn't like the steak, they were sending it back. She taught me how to use my time. I don't stand around the kitchen, I clean when I have time. She would take and teach me if it's not busy, start making salads for dinner. Make sure you keep the dining room clean and orderly and ready for the next customer. It was a lot, but I learned how to do it. And it was a big help to me to have someone who knew. The front desk was another problem, you know, for me anyway. There was a whole bunch of stuff to learn. How do you check guests in? How do you keep their bills? How do you sell stuff? I didn't have a cash register for, I would say, probably 10 years. We had an envelope, chuck the money in. Well, how do you take and explain where that money's coming from? Who knows? Well, we did figure it out. And then we had some interesting things happen, like the first day the state health inspector came. Now, Bruce and I had never even talked about a health inspector. I didn't know anything about it. And needless to say, Bruce was off guiding guests that day. So there I was. And I failed the first question when he said, "Can I see your license to operate?" Things got a little better, and I managed to pass. And when Bruce came home, I had lots of questions because I really didn't know what he was doing. I just kind of walked along behind him. But it was interesting, and like I say, I managed to pass the first time, so that counts. By the end of the summer, I was tired. I had never had so many people ask me questions. People who thought I knew what I was doing, who thought I knew how the lodge was supposed to run. And I didn't. I never had. And so I was guessing all the time. Next summer, changes came. For any of you who know Bruce, you know that change was always part of him. There was nothing sacred at Gunflint Lodge except maybe that we put people in cabins for the night. Beyond that, we always had changes. And my first change was Justine. She spent the first summer down in Grand Marais running what was then called the Grand Marais Northwoods Outfitters. And at that time, it was located in what's now the senior center. A little bit smaller, but the senior center. Because she didn't want to feel like, for me to feel like she was looking at everything. But she and I got along well. And the second summer, Janet Hansen and Justine dissolved their partnership. And the dissolution was very simple. They had 50 packs. 25 went here, and 25 went there. They had 50 canoes. This one here, this one here. So in that respect, it was easy. And Justine was going to come and run the lodge, or the outfitters, because she knew it. Thank God, I don't know it. I took and I had a good relationship with my mother-in-law. We always worked together. She was always very supportive for me. But I couldn't have run the outfitters to save my soul. You know, I just wasn't what I did. And in fact, one time I remember I had to route some people on a canoe trip. And I was talking with Sue Douglas, and Sue said, "You have to remember that you always know more than they know." And so I got my way through it, but it gave me a little bit of confidence that I could get through. After 2 or 3 years, we bought the outfitters from Bruce's mother. We always hired a person to run it. And so very rarely did I get up there. I could do the basics. I could pack food, I could pack gear, but this routing business was not for me. And Mom would be around the lodge during the summer. She always looked at everything that was going on. I don't care what it was. And I'd get a phone call. whoever just left in the red truck was going very fast. Or, there seems to be a party going on down by cabin 12. Whatever. So I trot down and figure it out. But she was good because she picked up on the things that were important, that made a difference. Somebody driving that red truck might take and run into some mailboxes, which happened more than once. And she knew that that could happen, and I wasn't smart enough to figure it out yet, but it worked. And the staff knew that she was there. That was another big thing. It's always helpful to have extra people looking around and figuring it out. So it was fun, but it wasn't, you never knew what the phone call was going to be. And her voice was very distinctive, so that when I would pick up the phone and say Gunflint Lodge, and I heard the person driving the red truck, I knew exactly who was calling me. She was sitting at her desk, typing her weekly column, looking. So it worked. 1973 and 75 were big times for us. Our two sons were born, Robert and Lee. About that time, I would say 2 years later, maybe, JT worked for us all summer long and all winter long, and he hauled blocks and helped Bruce building a cabin. And he also taught the boys a game called Far, Far Away. And the way he played the game was, the boys went far, far away, thinking that he was going to chase them, but he didn't. He just let them go until they came back. So that was fun. And it was a good time we had. He managed to not get bound down by these two and 4-year-old kids who were always willing to do something. One of the things that occurred during our 50 years of running the lodge was the constant building and remodeling of cabins. We built at least once and sometimes twice on every single building on the Gunflint Lodge. I don't care what it was, whether it was the dock house, whether it was the outfitters, whether it was an individual cabin. We changed them all in some way. And usually we did it every other year. Bruce did it for a number of years using staff from the lodge. Then we had Mike Landy, who came in and was our savior. And then for some of the last couple ones, Jordy Kirk helped. But there was still plenty for us to do. We were open now all years around, so that meant there were guests all around. Bruce wouldn't have had time to build a cabin if he'd wanted to. And it worked out well for people to come in and build them for us. And we got used to what they wanted and they got used to what we wanted, so it worked out well. And the way we did it was, in October, we would start to take things out of the cabins. After the last reservation left, everything came out of the cabins. And we would take and burn them down if necessary, destroy them and carry them somewhere else, something like that. Then the next step would be to do whatever type of cement work was necessary. And we were under the gun because once it started freezing every night, we weren't doing cement work. So that put a lot of pressure on. And then the next stop was to put walls, windows, and roof on. Because once you got those on, you could build any day. And so when we got to that stage and the roofs were on and the buildings were enclosed, a little bit of the pressure took and got off of our backs. Because now we had all winter to finish this cabin. Well, by spring, it was a little different. The cabin wasn't finished because we had other things to do, and the guests were coming in for the walleye season. So we had to take and work extra hard at the last few minutes, and I do not believe there was ever a cabin ready before, like 3 days even, or 2 days before the guests were arriving. Most of the time.
2 hours.
Yes, 2 hours. Yes, Mike knows about those. And it worked out fine, but no question the guests were driving down to the cabin while the final cleaning was emptying from the cabin. So, And my job with regards to building was not building, because I'm not a builder, but I was responsible for taking and getting everything for the inside of the cabin. You know, we had to have carpet, that wasn't so bad. We had to have furniture, that wasn't so bad. We had to have beds, we had to have the kitchens fully taken up with whatever cooking utensils we needed. And that's the kind of stuff that I did. And it's a little, first of all, I'd never done it in a real house before. And it's a little different than a real house. For example, when you put beds in a cabin, you want to make sure 3 of the sides are open and you can get around them, because it's hard and slow to make a bed that is maybe only 1 of the 4 sides is available to you. And we didn't use bunk beds for the same reason. It's hard to crawl up to that top thing and make it look decent. And so I think one time we had bunk beds in, I want to say cabin 4, but after I saw what happened, never again. And we wanted to take and look at dining room tables. If you have a cabin that has beds in it for 6 people, you better make sure that dining room table can seat 6 people. You can't, and some of the big ones, we had 4-bedroom cabins, could seat a lot of people. So we had to make sure we had a big table for them. And we had to make sure that it was constructed well, because many people didn't really care about the condition of the table. They were leaving Saturday, thank you. And so we were always looking for tables that had good tops that would resist any type of abuse the people put on them, that could be used all day long, because Saturday afternoon it was raining and the kids were going to do a jigsaw puzzle on the table. And so those are the kinds of things that you had to think about when you went to order stuff for the cabin. And it was a new way of thinking of furnishing a cabin. And so we had our cabins open all winter. There was also the lodge as of 1990 that was open all winter. And for the lodge, I think we allowed, what was it, 6 weeks, Mike, to take and remodel and winterize the entire lodge, which was a big deal. The windows in the lodge when we started were single pane. You needed double pane. The walls had zero insulation in them, so everything had to be taken apart. And we did it from the outside with the idea that while we were insulating these walls, we could take and redo all of the electricity wiring, because that was old, and we did different things now. We had to put a heating system in, and we had a 6-week deadline, and that was it. And I think the only time that we took off was Thanksgiving Day. It was a beautiful day, and Eleanor Matzis, a family friend for many years, was with us and couldn't understand why we weren't out there working. And I said, we can take 1 day. That's it. So that was good. And then we had, over the years, what to us seemed to be big decisions to make. For example, the smorgasbord. Many of you ate over the years at the smorgasbord. Yes, Joanna knows. And we had, we'd serve 100 to 200 people, depending upon what it was. But as the years went on, it became less popular. The fluctuation in the numbers of people became more difficult. And so you had to guess how many people you're going to have, because that Jell-O salad will not be good next week. And a lot of even the heated stuff will not keep till next week. And it was a lot of work. Everything on the smorgasbord was something that we only served that day. So we had to take and plan it and do it. And ultimately the decision was, we're not going to do smorgasbord anymore. It's not as popular as it used to be, and we don't need to do it. And it was a change. Ultimately, we replaced it with the barbecue, the outdoor barbecue. We didn't get quite as many people who weren't guests of the lodge, but we didn't have to prepare near as much food in advance. It was a much tighter window of food that we were preparing, so that worked out well. Another decision also related to food. Should we get a liquor license? Mother had never had a liquor license. Ultimately, it wasn't available, and ultimately the county changed their rules so that it would be available, but did we want it? There's a lot of problems with liquor license. What if some crew of guys up logging decided to come in one night and have a party? What if the staff of other resorts wanted to come in regularly and party when they were done with work? What about our own staff? And we ultimately decided that we were going to try it. We were going to get a full liquor license, but we were going to try and beat off these potential problems before they occurred. So our liquor always was set a little high so that we didn't get men coming in just to sit there all night and drink beer. We carded people. Our own staff, we knew how old they were. We didn't have to card them. But staff from other places we carded, and you know, kids have all sorts of ways of avoiding their birth date. But we did all right with that, and ultimately we solved the problems. We made a little extra money, and I think it brought people into the lodge whom we might not perhaps have. So it was a fun decision. And then we got another food problem. Staff meals. Most everybody served meals to their staff, especially if they lived on the property, which ours all did at that time. When you have a bigger staff, you almost have to have at least one and maybe more people to produce 3 meals a day for them. That meant a small kitchen was even more crowded. Your head chef was trying to get dinner ready to serve to the guests, but a half hour before that they have to serve a meal to the staff. And where's that big dining room to put the staff? They can't eat out in the front dining room where the guests are going to eat, so you've got to have a big room that you can feed them in. Again, it was something that we decided we had to stop. We didn't worry about the fact that the other smaller resorts around us all fed their staff. When you have 50 people, you have to have a place for it. It becomes pretty obvious you can't afford to feed them all. And in many ways the staff were happy, because I don't think the good Lord himself could keep all of them satisfied with the food we served. Some of them didn't even know what a casserole was. You know, they'd always had pork chops and steak and things like that instead of the mishmash of a casserole. And many of them felt that they wanted to save money by the way they ate. Now, some of the problems that came in were, how do people who do not have a car get to town to buy groceries? Do we sell them groceries from our fixings here, and how do we plan on how much they're going to want in a week's time? So it was not a simple decision, but we did it. I don't know if it was the right one, it was what we did. And then we had other big decisions that we had to make that came at us from the outside, that we had really no control over. We had to just take and adjust to. So one of the things that we had was the 1978 wilderness legislation, which threatened the ability of our people to continue in the outfitting business. There were a lot of rules and regulations and changes that were part of that. And Bruce spent about a third of his time for a year fighting that legislation, trying to get it amended so that it gave us a little bit more room to operate. And our lodge business declined during that time. We were in the news for reasons we didn't particularly care to be in the news. Bruce was gone. My temperament was terrible. You know, we had a lot of things that we had to decide. And ultimately, the act was passed, but it was a lot easier to live with because the people in the community and in Ely had done a lot of work influencing the legislation and what it would be about. A few years later, we experienced the blowdown. We all experienced the blowdown. 2 days before, I couldn't have told you what a blowdown was, but I sure found out. And basically, a blowdown is a straight line wind of about 100 miles per hour that came out of the west. And for 30 to 45 minutes, it blew everything down. And we were right in the middle of it. It blew right down Gunflint Lake. It pushed all the water down Gunflint Lake. It pushed hundreds of trees. There's places on the south road of Gunflint Lake that you could see the woods, through the woods to the lake. I'd never ever seen it in all the years I'd been here, but it happened and we survived, but it was very difficult and the cleanup was just as bad. We had to get everybody out. There was no telephone line. We had just gotten a box telephone. It was about this big with a regular telephone on it. This is pre-cell phone era. And Bruce had found a place up against the Loon Lake Road where it goes from Gunflint Lodge to the Loon Lake Lodge access, where our cell phone connected with the tower in Lutsen, Minnesota, which of course was not affected by the blowdown at all. And first he got on and he called the heavy equipment operators and arranged for them to come up to help clear trees. And we had them working for about a week to 10 days. There were so many trees down. And the trees were down everywhere. They were down on all of our buildings. They were down on our vehicles, on our guests' vehicles, all sorts of places. It was a real mess. And then after he got finished, I got on canceling reservations, trying to get people to come later so that we didn't totally lose the reservation because we were in no position to host any guests for a week to 10 days. And there was never any question about letting guests or staff go because we didn't have business, because we had plenty of work for them to do. There were trees that had to be cut up even after they had been moved. There were trash and debris that had to be hauled away. Cabins had to be fixed. We didn't have much in the way of damage that we had to get a big, huge crew in to work. But, you know, the corner of that roof was broken down and we had to get these cars out of here, pulled out some way. And but it was a shock how much work it was. And we had the staff in the kitchen to feed the people, our own staff who were working. And at that time, of course, we didn't have any, we weren't serving them meals. But we had plenty of food because we bought food thinking we'd be in business. So that was a huge, huge time for us. And another thing that happened was, what was it, 4 or 5 years later, we got fires. Now we've always had forest fires. They're a part of living in this kind of wilderness area. But when you have as much blowdown that has been sitting, drying, and rotting for 3 or 4 years, you have the potential for a really big fire. And we'd had a fire that was west of Seagull Lake the year before, and then we had the Ham Lake fire. And Ham Lake occurred when one of Tuscarora Lodge's guests came for a solo canoe trip. He always wanted to be the first one on Ham Lake. And that's what happened, and they set him out. And it was really dry that year. It was before the leaves had come on the trees. And when he started his, I believe, and I can't quote this for sure, his first fire, it got away from him. And that was the beginning. So the fire started at Ham Lake. When the people there had to get out, they went out on the road with fire on either side of them. They didn't, the lodge was, I think they lost one outhouse or something. But the wind blew it all the way north up to Seagull, burning down houses all over creation. Then the wind shifted and it started to come back. And it looked like it was going to come back on the south side of Gunflint and then go right down the south, or on the west side of Gunflint, and then go right down the south shore of Gunflint. Well, as you know, there's a lot of homes there. And so one of the local men suggested that we have a forest fire that the forestry took and started on Magnetic Lake, and that would stop the fire from coming down into more Magnetic and then Gunflint. Fine, they did that. And then the wind took it and it went right down the north shore of Gunflint Lake. And it was horrific. It sounded like a train going through. We had planes on the lake that were skimming to get water to drop on it. And so it's going down the lake. And now it's the wind's shifting again, and it's gonna go down in Little Gunflint and skip over Little Gunflint. And so there was another fire started just past Earshaped Bay to take and hopefully stop it. It didn't stop it, but it kept it away again from the south shore. And then after that, it went around crossed in Little Gunflint and went down to the Gunflint Trail. And as it was coming back through there, it was small enough that they were able to stop it. But it was a huge forest fire. And of course, ultimately they had 500 people. And the Forest Service does not have crews to feed people all over creation. It takes about a week to bring in a crew to feed. So they find someone local to do it. And we were local. We were the only ones close enough, and we were the only ones big enough. And all of our guests were gone again, so we took all the furniture out of the lodge, put it in back under tarps, and we took and started feeding firefighters. And by the end, the last few meals were about 500 people at a time. Yeah, and so you'd get up and you'd start cooking breakfast because they wanted to have breakfast at 6 a.m. to get them out there. And you'd feed everybody, and when they came in after eating, you had to have their lunches ready. And the Forest Service has a strict protocol of what each lunch has to include. Plus, I can't remember if it's 10 or 15% have to be vegetarian. So you got paper bags with regular meals and plastic bags with vegetarian meals. And as soon as you're done feeding breakfast, then the neighbors all came in to help fix lunch for the next day. My job was to take and bake. And I baked on alternate days brownies or Hudson Bay bread. And I baked a sheet of them like this. I baked however many I needed. That's about 50, so I sometimes baked 10 sheets. Mm-hmm. And the neighbors were in the dining room making lunch, and Bruce was going back and forth. Somebody'd say, we need more ham. He'd go back and get the ham. We've got an excess of this, we got that, we need this. And so that's what we did for it. And the day that the catering company was due to come, we were informed that they were going to evacuate the whole south shore of Gunflint Lake. And Lee was there, our son Lee, and Bruce, and they kept, I want to say, 3 or 4 other staff members, and the rest of us were all sent south to get out of the way. And as they were feeding dinner that night, and we had to feed it because we were the only dinner available for the firefighters, the power went out. So we weren't even going to be able to take and close up afterward. And so they took and closed what little they could and shipped everybody south afterward, and it was done. And we were lucky with the fire because it did a lot of damage in that about 150 buildings were burned to the ground. Seagull got hit really badly. Gunflint, I can't think of anyone that burned. Prices, yes, Prices on the North Shore. That's right, they burned all of their stuff there and had to rebuild. But otherwise, it worked out well, and we were glad when we no longer had to feed people. It was a little bit, I think the last day, there was the most, and they kept shoving another piece of meat or another this or that. They were running out of meat, so they did walleye. They took hams and sliced them. Anything to, first of all, use what we had, and second of all, to get enough calories to keep these guys going. So, and the next morning after we were done, they were over at the caterers, and so we were with it. So that was that, and those are just a few of the kinds of changing circumstances. We had to decide whether to go left or right, and sometimes you had no choice. Forest fire comes, you've got to go right, and that's all there is to it. And I could stand here and tell you lots more of the various minor issues that we had to decide, but gives you an idea there's always something to decide and something to change, and we did it. So, does anybody have any questions? No? Good.
Would you comment on the Kerfoot Cove experience?
Oh, that was pouring money down a hole. There used to be a restaurant in town where the Best Western is now. And the guy wanted to get somebody in to run it. And we leased the building for him and ran it as Kerfoot's Cove. And we were a little too early in the sequence. The town of Grand Marais had not gotten into winter business. And summer was fine at the Cove, we did really well, but winter was terrible. And if we had been, say, 5 years sooner, we probably could have done a lot better, or 5 years later, we could have done a lot better with it. But ultimately, we sold it, and we bought the common ground, which was where the bank is now, the Grand Marais State Bank. And that move didn't do much either. We put a lot of money into it and thought we could have put the money at the lodge and done much better. So.
When did the Gunflint Lodge open originally?
The Gunflint Lodge opened originally in 1925.
Oh my.
It was owned by Russell Blankenberg and his mother, Dora. Dora was actually, I think, the money behind it, and Russell ran it for her. And at the same time, the upper trail was opening up, and Russell started Seagull Lodge. And Dora, losing Russell as a person to maintain it, quickly decided that she didn't want to do it. She owned a resort called Lighthouse Lodge in Wisconsin. And it was a much bigger back and forth than she wanted. And so she was going to sell it. And it so happened that the lawyer who helped her set it up was George Spunner, that would be Justine's father. And his wife heard about it, May Spunner, and she came up and in 1929 bought Gunflint Lodge. And so the family has run it from 1929 on until John and Mindy. Yes, Mindy?
Are you sticking with 1929 now?
It is the right time.
Okay.
We got 1927, which is what a lot of mother stuff is, but she was remembering it after 29, and in 85 she was writing 27, and I think she just forgot.
So now we have logos that say 25 and logos that say 27.
Oh yeah, we have all that. It's a little variety.
Wait, what is that 29 to the next?
Yeah, but 20, and the reason that I say 29 is because I found articles in the paper that tell me.
Right, so I read that in your book about Lily.
Yes.
But I know that most of the stuff that we have at the lodge says 27. So
Yes, that's
I
right.
wanted to make sure that you're you're confident in 29.
I am confident in 29, I always have been. But when Mother
I
wrote,
won't tell Bruce.
yeah, when Mother wrote Woman in the Boundary Water, she never asked me, so. Anybody else got any questions?
Just one goofy one. You were talking about the firefighters at the end. Why did you pull everything out of the lodge?
So that we could set more tables up.
Oh, okay, just brought in.
We had banquet tables up,
Sure.
and we needed some more seating
Yeah.
to do it
Got
faster.
it.
So that's what we did. What?
There were 7 of us that stayed that night and fed those guys. We had 550 guys. It took us 6 hours to get them in the building. The last guy came through the door at midnight.
Wow.
There were 2 cooks, 2 guys running food to the buffet line, and Cheryl Hinderman and I were running drinks.
Yeah.
And Bruce was at the door because he said, I want to make damn sure the count's right, because he was getting $15 a head.
Yeah, Bruce was always good with money. Okay, any other questions? Okay.
Fantastic.